Roberto was a simple man, the kind of person who almost goes unnoticed in the hustle and bustle of the city. Every night, he swept deserted streets under the dim glow of streetlights while the rest of the world slept. The sound of his broom scraping the ground was almost therapeutic, a routine that brought him peace amidst a difficult life. A widower at 40, Roberto had learned to find solace in small things. The smell of fresh coffee he brewed himself before heading out, the baker's morning greeting on his way to work, and the pride of leaving the streets clean, even if no one noticed. Although he bore the marks of loss, his eyes still sparkled with a rare kind of kindness that seemed unshakable. Roberto believed that even on the darkest nights, there was always a spark of light. It was another ordinary night on Roberto's shift. The sky was heavy with clouds, heralding the storm that would soon pour down. He calmly swept a street corner, bustling during the day, but silent now, when he heard a muffled sound coming from a nearby alley. At first, he thought it was just a cat rummaging through the trash, a common occurrence during his rounds. But the sound was different. It resembled a sob. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Roberto set his broom aside and walked toward the alley. The streetlight barely illuminated the narrow space, but as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he noticed a small silhouette huddled next to a pile of trash bags. It was a boy. "Hey, are you all right?" Roberto asked, his voice filled with concern but also care. The boy slowly lifted his head, revealing eyes that shone not with hope but with pure fear. He was soaked from head to toe, his wet clothes clinging to his thin frame. His face was dirty, as if dust and tears had been there for a long time. "Please don't send me away," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible but hitting Roberto like a punch to the chest. Roberto crouched down, trying to appear less intimidating. "Calm down. I won't do anything to you. Are you lost? Where are your parents?" The boy hesitated before responding. "I have nowhere to go." The rain began to fall in heavy drops, and Roberto knew he couldn't leave him there. He extended his hand. "Come on. You'll be all right. We'll figure this out." The boy, wary, took Roberto's hand with hesitation. There was something in the boy's gaze that seemed to hide a story far bigger than he was willing to share. The rain showed no mercy, pounding rooftops and windows as if determined to wash away the city's secrets. Roberto and the boy arrived at his small apartment, drenched and silent. Miguel, as the boy introduced himself along the way, seemed even more tense, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment to drag him away. "Come in, Miguel. It's nothing fancy, but at least it's dry and safe," Roberto said, trying to convey calmness. Miguel hesitated but slowly crossed the threshold, his footsteps echoing on the worn floor. He seemed so small in that simple space, surrounded by old furniture and peeling paint. Roberto took off his wet coat and hung it on a hook, watching the boy closely. While Roberto heated a pot of soup on the stove, the boy remained motionless in the armchair, his legs drawn up to his chest as if trying to disappear. "Are you hungry?" Roberto asked gently. Miguel nodded, but didn't utter a word. Roberto placed the bowl of hot soup in his hands, watching as he held it carefully, almost as if afraid it would break or be taken away. "Do you live around here?" "No," Miguel replied so softly that it was almost drowned out by the sound of the rain. Roberto sighed. Something was very wrong, but he knew that pressing the boy for answers wouldn't help. He needed time. Then, an unexpected sound broke the silence. Loud knocks at the door. Roberto turned quickly, his heart racing. Who would be knocking at this hour, in the middle of a storm? He approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. Outside stood two men, both wearing soaked black jackets. They had rigid postures, and one of them held what appeared to be a flashlight. "Open the door," one of them ordered, his voice deep and impatient. Roberto felt a chill run through him. He glanced back and saw that Miguel was petrified, his wide eyes fixed on the door. "Who are they, Miguel?" Roberto whispered. Miguel didn't answer, but his hands started trembling, and he dropped the bowl of soup onto the floor. The banging on the door grew louder. "We know someone's in there. Open up now." Roberto knew something far bigger was unfolding. He signaled for Miguel to hide in the adjacent room and closed the door carefully. "Stay quiet. Don't come out until I say it's safe. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door just enough to see the men's faces. Good evening. Can I help you? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The taller of the two men leaned closer, his face partially hidden by the shadow of his hood. We're looking for a kid, about this high. He gestured with his hand. Thin, dark hair. You seen him around? Roberto maintained his composure, even as his heart pounded in his chest. No, I haven't seen anyone. Just me here. Why are you looking for him? The man narrowed his eyes, as if trying to gauge whether Roberto was lying. He's a runaway. We've been hired to bring him back. It's better if you don't get involved. I'm sorry, Roberto replied calmly, but I haven't seen anyone. If I do, I'll let you know. The second man, shorter and stockier, stepped forward. Mind if we take a look inside? Roberto felt a surge of panic, but quickly masked it. Yes, I do mind. This is my home, and I don't appreciate strangers barging in. If you have a warrant or something, fine. Otherwise, good night. The taller man smirked. We'll be back, he said, his tone more of a threat than a promise. With that, the two men turned and disappeared into the rain, their figures fading into the darkness. Roberto closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. He locked it securely and then rushed to the room where Miguel was hiding. It's okay. They're gone, he said softly, opening the door. Miguel emerged hesitantly, his face pale and his hands still trembling. They'll come back. They always do. Roberto knelt to the boy's level, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Miguel, I need to know what's going on. Who are they? Why are they after you? The boy hesitated, biting his lip. For a moment, Roberto thought he wouldn't answer, but then Miguel whispered, They work for a man I escaped from. What man? What did he do to you? Roberto asked, his voice laced with concern. Miguel looked away, his eyes welling with tears. He said I was his property, that I had no one, so I belonged to him. Roberto's stomach churned. He didn't need to hear more to understand the horror the boy had endured. You're safe now, Miguel. No one owns you. No one will hurt you here. I promise. The storm continued outside, the relentless rain drumming against the windows. Inside, Roberto sat down across from Miguel, determined to gain the boy's trust. Listen, Miguel, I know you're scared, and I know those men won't stop looking for you. But we need to figure out what to do next. Miguel stared at his hands, his voice barely audible. They'll find me. They always do. Not this time, Roberto said firmly. But I need your help. I need to understand what we're up against. Can you tell me more about this man? Where you came from? Miguel hesitated, then took a deep breath. I live in a house. There were other kids like me. He said he took us in because no one else wanted us. But it wasn't true. He made us work, clean, do things we didn't want to do. If we didn't listen, he hurt us. Roberto felt a wave of anger rise within him, but he forced himself to stay calm for Miguel's sake. How did you get away? There was a back door, Miguel explained. One night, I waited until everyone was asleep. I ran as fast as I could. I didn't know where to go. I just kept running, and now they're trying to take you back, Roberto murmured, piecing the story together. He clenched his fists, furious that such things could happen to children. You did the right thing by running, Miguel, and I won't let them take you back there. I swear. Miguel looked at him, his eyes filled with a fragile glimmer of hope. But what can we do? They'll find me. Roberto thought for a moment. First, we stay out of sight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the next steps. Maybe I can get in touch with someone who can help, someone who knows how to deal with people like this. Miguel nodded, but the fear in his eyes remained. Roberto knew this wouldn't be easy. The boy had been through unimaginable trauma, and now he was placing his trust in a stranger. Get some rest, Roberto said, showing him to a small, makeshift bed. You'll need your strength. And remember, you're not alone anymore. As Miguel lay down, Roberto stayed awake, staring out the window. He knew those men would return, and he knew he had to be ready when they did. Roberto barely slept that night. He kept watch by the window, the broom he had used earlier now leaning against the wall like an improvised weapon. The storm eventually subsided, leaving a quiet, eerie calm in its wake. But Roberto's thoughts were anything but calm. How could people prey on children like Miguel? The boy's story gnawed at him, filling him with a sense of urgency to act. By dawn, Miguel was awake, sitting silently on the edge of the makeshift bed. His small frame and weary expression made him look even younger than he was. Roberto approached with a warm cup of coffee, which Miguel accepted gratefully. "How are you feeling?" Roberto asked. Miguel shrugged, taking a small sip. "Better, I guess. But they'll come back, won't they?" Roberto sat down across from him. "Probably, but that doesn't mean we're powerless. We need to think ahead, be smart. I have a friend who works at a community center. She might know what to do." Miguel's eyes widened slightly. "But what if they find me there? What if they find us?" Roberto reached out and gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Trust me, Miguel. I'll keep you safe. We'll go together, and we'll make sure you're somewhere they can't touch you." Miguel hesitated, but eventually nodded. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to hope that things could be different. By mid-morning, Roberto and Miguel headed out. Roberto had lent Miguel a clean shirt and jacket, though they were slightly oversized for the boy's frame. As they walked, Roberto kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, alert for any sign of the men from the night before. The community center was a modest building nestled between a bakery and a convenience store. It was a place Roberto had visited many times, often helping out when he could. He greeted the receptionist warmly and asked to speak with Clara, a social worker he trusted. Clara emerged moments later, her sharp eyes softening as she saw Roberto. "Roberto, it's been a while. What brings you here?" Roberto gestured toward Miguel. "Clara, this is Miguel. He needs help. Serious help." Clara immediately knelt to Miguel's level, her tone gentle and reassuring. "Hi, Miguel. It's nice to meet you. Can you tell me a little about what's going on?" Miguel looked to Roberto for reassurance before speaking. Slowly, haltingly, he recounted his story. The house, the other children, the man who controlled everything, and the men who pursued him. Clara listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When Miguel finished, she placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Miguel, thank you for sharing that with me. You're very brave, and I promise we'll do everything we can to keep you safe." After settling Miguel in a quiet corner with some coloring books and snacks, Clara turned to Roberto. "This is serious. If what he's saying is true, we're dealing with a trafficking operation or something equally horrific." Roberto nodded grimly. "I had a feeling. What can we do?" "I'll contact the authorities," Clara said. "But we need to be cautious. If these people are as dangerous as Miguel says, we can't afford any mistakes. They might have connections or ways to track him down. Will the police really protect him?" Roberto asked, skepticism creeping into his voice. "They'll investigate, but we'll also get Miguel into a secure shelter," Clara assured him. "There are places that specialize in helping kids like him. They'll make sure he's safe while this is being sorted out." Roberto sighed, a mix of relief and lingering worry. "Good. He deserves that. No kid should go through what he's been through." Clara smiled gently. "You've done a lot for him, Roberto. Bringing him here was the right thing to do." Roberto glanced at Miguel, who was now engrossed in his coloring. "I just wanted to have a chance, a real chance." Roberto stayed at the community center as Clara made the necessary calls. Miguel, sitting in the corner with his coloring books, seemed calmer, though Roberto could see that the boy was still on edge. His eyes darted toward the door every time someone walked by, his body tense as if ready to bolt at a moment's notice. "How long will this take?" Roberto asked Clara when she returned, a clipboard in hand. "Not long," she replied. "The shelter has been notified, and they're preparing to take him in. They have secure facilities and staff trained to handle situations like this. The police will meet us there to take Miguel's statement and begin their investigation." Roberto nodded but couldn't shake his unease. "Do you think they'll really be able to protect him? Those men, they seemed relentless." Clara placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "It won't be easy, Roberto, but Miguel is no longer alone. The shelter has dealt with cases like this before, and they work closely with law enforcement. The most important thing now is keeping Miguel safe and ensuring those responsible are brought to justice." As the day wore on, Roberto sat with Miguel, trying to distract him with conversation. They talked about simple things, Miguel's favorite foods, animals, and the kind of life he dreamed of having one day. "I just want to feel safe," Miguel admitted quietly, his voice trembling. "You will, Miguel," Roberto assured him. "You deserve to feel safe, and you will. I promise." Finally, a van from the shelter arrived. Two women stepped out, both wearing friendly smiles and uniforms with the shelter's logo. They introduced themselves as Maria and Carla and immediately made an effort to put Miguel at ease. "Hi, Miguel," Maria said, crouching down to his level. "We're here to take you to a safe place where no one can hurt you. There will be other kids there, and you'll have your own bed, toys, and lots of people who care about you." Miguel glanced at Roberto, his eyes filled with uncertainty. Roberto knelt down beside him. "It's okay, Miguel. These people are here to help you. I'll be here for you, too, whenever you need me." The boy nodded hesitantly and took Maria's hand. As they led him toward the van, Roberto felt a pang in his chest. He knew this was the right thing to do, but it didn't make it any easier to see the boy go. After the van drove away, Roberto stood outside the community center, staring into the distance. Clara joined him, sensing his heavy heart. "You did an incredible thing for him," she said. "Most people wouldn't have gone as far as you did." "I couldn't just leave him there," Roberto replied. "I don't know how anyone could." Clara nodded. "You gave him a chance? That's more than most kids in his situation ever get." Roberto turned to her, his expression filled with determination. "But what about those men? The ones who were after him? They're still out there." "They are," Clara admitted, "and the authorities will do everything they can to track them down. But these things take time, Roberto. The important thing now is that Miguel is safe." Roberto sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just wish there was more I could do." "You've done more than enough," Clara assured him. "But if you really want to help, stay in touch with Miguel. Kids like him need to know they're not forgotten, that someone out there cares about them." Roberto nodded slowly. "I will, no matter what." The days that followed felt strange to Roberto. His apartment, once filled with Miguel's quiet presence, now seemed unbearably empty. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy and the life he had fled from. The men who had come looking for him were still out there, and the thought of them preying on other vulnerable children made Roberto's blood boil. One evening, unable to shake the feeling of restlessness, Roberto decided to visit the community center to check on Miguel's status. Clara greeted him warmly, but could see the worry etched on his face. "Roberto, you've done so much for Miguel," she said. "I know it's hard, but he's in good hands now. I just need to know he's okay," Roberto replied. "Can you tell me how he's doing?" Clara smiled. "He's adjusting well, considering everything he's been through." The shelter staff said he's starting to open up little by little. He even made a couple of friends. Relief washed over Roberto, but it was accompanied by a lingering sense of responsibility. "And those men? Has there been any progress in finding them?" "The police are investigating," Clara said. "But cases like this are complicated. These networks operate in the shadows, and it takes time to gather evidence and build a case. What's important is that Miguel is safe, and the shelter has measures in place to keep it that way." Roberto nodded, but couldn't help feeling that time was of the essence. "I just want to make sure no one else ends up in the same situation as Miguel." "You have a good heart, Roberto," Clara said. "Not many people would go as far as you have. But remember, you can't do everything alone. Trust that the people handling this are doing their part." Despite Clara's reassurances, Roberto couldn't stay idle. He began to look for ways to help in his own way. He reached out to local organizations and advocacy groups, volunteering his time and resources to support efforts against child exploitation. It was his way of channeling the anger and frustration he felt into something constructive. One afternoon, while working at a fundraiser for a local children's charity, Roberto spotted a familiar face. It was Maria, one of the women who had taken Miguel to the shelter. "Maria," he called out, making his way over. She greeted him with a warm smile. "Roberto, it's so good to see you. How are you?" "I'm doing okay," he replied. "I've been thinking a lot about Miguel." "How is he?" Maria's expression softened. "He's doing well. He's a resilient boy. Of course, it'll take time for him to fully heal, but he's in a good place now. He talks about you, you know." "He does?" Roberto asked, his chest tightening with emotion. Maria nodded. He says you're the reason he feels safe, that you gave him hope when he thought no one cared. Hearing those words filled Roberto with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. I'd like to see him if that's possible, just to let him know I'm still here for him. Maria smiled. I think that would mean a lot to him. I'll arrange it. A week later, Roberto found himself standing outside the shelter. It was a modest building, surrounded by a small garden where a few children were playing. He spotted Miguel among them, his laughter mingling with the others. It was a sight that made Roberto's heart swell. When Miguel saw Roberto, his face lit up, and he ran toward him. Roberto! Roberto knelt down, wrapping the boy in a tight hug. Hey, buddy, how are you? I'm good, Miguel said, his voice filled with excitement. I've been learning to draw. Do you want to see? Of course, Roberto replied, smiling. I'd love to see what you've been working on. Miguel led him inside, proudly showing off his drawings. They were simple, but filled with vibrant colors, reflecting the newfound joy he was beginning to experience. As they talked, Roberto felt a deep sense of gratitude. Miguel's laughter and enthusiasm were proof that, despite everything, healing was possible. It reminded him why he had stepped in to help and reinforced his commitment to doing more for kids like Miguel. Before leaving the shelter, Roberto spoke with Maria and Carla, thanking them for the work they were doing. You're giving these kids a chance to rebuild their lives. I can't thank you enough for what you've done for Miguel. You played a big part in that, Roberto, Maria said. You gave him the courage to trust again, to believe that there are good people in the world. As Roberto walked away, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew he couldn't change the world overnight, but he also knew that small actions could create ripples of change. Miguel's journey was just one of many, and Roberto was determined to keep fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And as the sun set over the city, Roberto returned to his modest life, sweeping the streets with a quiet pride, knowing that he had made a difference. The sound of his broom on the pavement was no longer just a routine. It was the rhythm of a man who had found his purpose.